Hello and welcome to the video lecture associated with routines and triggers. Routines are enormous in database management. You need routines and triggers to perform all sorts of tasks database management system. Routines, you have to explicitly, triggers fire. That's why they call them trigger fire. Triggers fire based on database events. So they are routines are some kind of program module. So a function, a procedure, a trigger are technically all routines. They just differ slightly. When you refer to a function will return values and take input parameters. It may or may not take input parameters, that's optional, but functions are used to return a value, one single value. And I kind of predicate that because technically, even though you're only allowed to return one value, you can return a comma delimited string, which is comprised of all values. So, yeah, you know, a function only returns one value, but if you're savvy about it, you can have a function return multiple values, and then all you'd have to do is when you catch what the function returns, you would have to split it or break it apart from the commas, and that's a fairly simple procedure to do. Then, we go on to procedures. Procedures are routines that do not return values. They can take input parameters. As far as Oracle is concerned, Oracle also has output parameters. I think SQL Server now also has output parameters, which are very interesting. Output parameters is a procedure's way of sending back values. Output parameters would be I'm passing in, right? So you know how to run a function. You've run functions before. You've done functions in the beginner SQL and in the advanced SQL. So you understand how to run functions. So functions take parameters. What you can do is instead of passing in a value, you can pass in a variable, which will take a value, and since it takes the value that the procedure gives it, that value is now available outside the procedure. So output parameters are for all intents and purposes, the means by which procedures return values. And then you have triggers. Triggers are routines that execute, again, based on a database event. The vast majority of triggers are based on, you know, when you insert a record, when you update a record, or when you delete a record, a trigger will fire. Triggers are typically associated with tables, but they can be associated with queries, they can be associated with database objects, they can be associated with the database. A trigger can fire because you shut down the database management system. But the author pretty much sticks to insert, updates, or delete triggers. A good use of a trigger would be setting up an audit table. So for instance, we're in the payroll department and somebody has just updated someone's salary by more than 5%. A trigger can be sensitive to the fact that, one, an update statement has been initiated. Within the trigger, it can test to see, it can test a value, right? So it can contest a criteria such as, is the new value 5% more than the old value? And based on that, it can send out an email and alert somebody, and it can certainly do its own insert and update statements to an audit table. So triggers are very, very powerful and very, very useful. We're going to do an example of a function and procedure in the next video lecture, but let's just take a look at what it would look like graphically. So how are triggers different from a routine? So a routine you actually have to call. So somehow you have to use the procedure name and pass in parameter values. So they're called explicitly. It goes and finds the stored procedure, it runs the code, it interacts with the database, and either returns values or performs the routine. A trigger is implicit, so a user executes an update statement, and invisible to that user in the background, a trigger fires to write a record to an audit table that they have no idea just happened. So again, triggers are very, very useful. So that is the end of my video lecture describing what a routine and a trigger is, and in a separate video we'll actually do an example using Microsoft Access.